Welcome back. We want to get right back to the Madigan verdict. We are starting to learn some of the charges right now. Do you want to run through a couple of these, Alex, and then we'll try to get to Charlie right away?
The first one, it appears, which is racketeering conspiracy with Madigan. They have not reached a verdict on that, so that is left blank. The second count, conspiracy against Michael Madigan, guilty on that count.
And we have a not guilty on 2 as well. Count 4 on Madigan, which was bribery, guilty. Count 5, travel act, which is guilty for Madigan. Count 6, bribery, guilty for Madigan.
Correct.
That's what we have right now. 7, Madigan guilty, which is the travel act. Count 8, Madigan guilty, wire fraud. 9, guilty, wire fraud. 10, guilty, wire fraud. Those all related to former Alderman Danny Solis, who did testify in trial. And as you remember, he wore a wire for the federal government, so he was a major witness.
Here's the next is count 11, bribery, not guilty for Mike Madigan on that 11th count.
That's a Solis.
One of the Solis, but then 12 is guilty on the travel act on count 12 for Mike Madigan. So far, 2 not guilty, 1 left, and now another guilty on count number 13, another violation of the Travel Act.
That involves Solis as well.
Lines, correct. 14, Madigan guilty, another count of the Travel Act, another Solis count. As these are all just coming in directly from the jury in real time, we appreciate you staying with us here. 15, attempted extortion, not guilty for Mike Madigan, related to the alleged scheme to get the developer of the Union West luxury apartment building. So that's a not guilty. 16, not guilty for Mike Madigan. That's another count of the Travel Act. There are 23 for Mike Madigan. We're going
Let's
through
get
here.
right now to Charlie Wojciechowski, who's in the Dirksen Federal Building. He's also getting this information from our court watcher as these different counts come in. Charlie, tell us a little bit about what you're hearing in reaction even now where you are.
Well, the fact that we're seeing guilty verdicts on bribery and extortion counts is really incredible in this case. These are the big, heavy charges. These are the ones that will draw the most in terms of a federal penalty, and the fact that we have guilty on some of the bribery counts does not bode well for Madigan. The fact that you're seeing not guilties in some of these cases means the jury just didn't have enough information to make a decision on, especially with that Union West project. A lot of the allegations were that he used his influence to steer business to his law firm. Well, his law firm testified that there was a very developed process to screen cases, so there was no conflict of interest in those cases. It seems as if the jury is understanding bribery to mean not necessarily bribery that benefited Madigan personally, but benefited his circle of friends and his confidants. That is important. What is also important in this case is something that Mr. Safer brought up earlier. When sentencing time comes around, it doesn't so much matter that you are found guilty on all counts, but he can argue, or the prosecutor, Amrit Bachu in this case, can argue that we found him guilty of bribery. We found him guilty of extortion. We found him guilty on these wire fraud charges. And in their totality, they can warrant a very serious sentence in this case. It also means the jury did not pay attention to the recent Supreme Court decisions, or I shouldn't say not pay attention, didn't give as much weight to the recent Supreme Court decisions which demanded a quid pro quo to define bribery. This came out of the Indiana case, if you remember. So the fact that there's no direct benefit to Madigan didn't matter so much. These gifts, these items of value from AT&T, from ComEd, and from others were construed as being as a benefit to the former speaker, and that's why you're seeing these verdicts in this case. I think that the blank verdicts you see here is just we didn't have enough information to make a decision. It shows the jury was really paying attention, really wanted to do a good job, did not want to overstep their mandate from the court. But the fact that you've got guilty verdicts on very serious charges, not very good for Mr. Madigan.
As you've been talking, as it turns out, they could not come to a decision on any of the McClain charges. They have all been called blank, which is what we believe to be a deadlock. Your thoughts on that? So all of the cases against McClain, which included bribery involving the Chinatown parcel, which mostly some of the Chinatown cases, as well as the racketeering case. What are your thoughts on that?
The fact that McClain had no political power and could not convey direct benefits on any particular party, I think weighs into that. McClain was a lobbyist, and a very good lobbyist by all accounts, one that took his job very seriously. All he could do was try to influence the speaker in these cases. He could bring these various job opportunities, these various investment opportunities to the speaker's attention. But in the end, Mike McClain made no decisions whether or not to pass on the carrier of last resort legislation for AT&T, made no decision as to whether to agree to a smart grid for ComEd. And for that reason, I think his activity is mitigated by the fact that he had nothing to provide. He may have provided these opportunities to the speaker, may have advised him to either take them or not take them, but in the end, Mike McClain had no power. All the power in this case resided with the Speaker's office and with Mike Madigan.
Charlie, any punishment that McClain would have received, it's a good point to note. He is already convicted on the previous ComEd trial on 9 felony counts in the ComEd 4 case. So he's already looking at a possible sentence at 77 years old, of a very difficult sentence there. We want to give you the raw numbers now that they're all collected here. Mike Madigan guilty on 11 of the 23 counts against him, not guilty 6 of those 23, and the jury could not reach a verdict on the other 6. And you mentioned the McClain charges, blank for all of those.
Let's bring Chuck Gowdy back in here on this, what you've heard so far.
Well, it's interesting what Charlie said, the differentiation between Madigan and McClain. Mike Madigan was obviously a long-time elected public official. He's the one who was operating, or should have been anyway, at a higher bar. The conviction against him can only be considered devastating to he and his attorneys. The government is going to, it's not a slam dunk. Obviously, there are some counts that they couldn't even get a verdict on, a couple of not guilties. But the government will certainly frame this when they come out to talk about it as a major victory. I mean, you know, there's been a room for Mike Madigan in the Illinois Corruption Hall of Fame, or shame, as some might call it, for decades. He's been under investigation for various things. Today, this jury unlocked the door for him.
What's the difference maker? As you mentioned, you're right. He has been under scrutiny. He's been criticized. I mean, he had a feud with many of our former governors, including Bruce Rauner, who was always gunning for him.
Right.
What do you think in this particular case? What was it that worked in this case? Was it Solis? Was it just having him on tape?
Well, it may have been, because the jury did convict on a couple of the Solis counts. The former alderman who wore a wire was operating as a covert member of the FBI. It was thought possibly that the jury wasn't going to believe Solis, and that all of those counts would be either not guilty or would be the ones they couldn't reach a verdict on for some reason. That's not the case. So they did believe Solis to some degree. It's clear, though, they didn't believe Madigan. Madigan's testimony didn't help him get off the hook here, because he's convicted of racketeering, of fraud. The racketeering conspiracy count number 1, carries a 20-year penalty with it. He was, not convicted on that.
He was yeah, there was a
he
deadlock.
was convicted of count 2 conspiracy. Oh, these are very serious felonies. Michael Madigan is a convicted felon now, and he's going to pay a stiff price for this.
As you guys were both hinting, what we are witnessing today is an affirmation by 12 of Michael Madigan's peers. The suspicions of millions of people in Illinois and many officials in Illinois of what had been going on for a long time. And this is nothing short, even though they didn't get all of the counts that they wanted and guilty for the federal prosecutors, this is nothing short of a gigantic victory and a sweep on several cases in a row now between AT&T, ComEd, the deferred payments that had to be made and given back, Burke. They're cleaning up corruption in a way that citizens had been looking for.
Does that work? I mean, and that's one of the questions I would have for you as someone who's been here, because we have seen, this is not the first rodeo on a convicted government official. I mean, almost every governor had been convicted before, and it was always the big name. Does it mean that politics changes in the state of Illinois?
Yeah, no. I mean, convictions have not been a good deterrent in the state of Illinois or the city of Chicago. In fact, the stats that I reported out a year ago, in the last 50 years, there's been an average of 1 public corruption conviction per week.
Wow.
In the state of Illinois for 50 years. That's how many cases have gone to trial and have ended in conviction.
And Madigan,
Mike Madigan's the latest.
And he survived 3 governors who went to jail before he ultimately now sees this conviction as well.
One of whom was pardoned this week, I might.
Yes, yes,
true.
that is true.
Down to 2.
That's another story.
That's true. But
yeah.
I also think another challenge for prosecutors that they were able to overcome. Mike Madigan did not have a cell phone, famously. He did not do email, famously. He tried to go through, and here's a look at how it all ended up here for Mike McClain and Michael Madigan. He famously used the code, our friend, as Mike McClain would often say, our friend would like this and that. Well, jurors didn't buy that it was some mythical figure. They thought they knew exactly what was going on some of these counts.
Have people gotten more sophisticated, maybe, as we've gone through the years? And it was clear, too, that the government, as you mentioned, they throw a lot at these cases. They're going after a lot of, there's 3 or 4 different instances. You had the Union West, you had the AT&T, you had the ComEd situation. So you're throwing a lot of different cases.
Right.
Is that what you think is effective in this case, or are jurors just more sophisticated about it?
Well, I think it may be a little of all of those things. I mean, we shouldn't be surprised that there were convictions here. The U.S. Attorney's Office is across the country. They win 95% of their cases. They bring cases they can win. If they didn't think they were going to win this case against Mike Madigan, they wouldn't have brought it in the first place. We would be talking about a much bigger story if he had been acquitted of everything.
Certainly.
The fact that he was convicted is not surprising, considering the way the U.S. Attorney's Office operates.
Go ahead.
Do you have a sense? I'm going back to your history of knowledge of just this city and its politics and the comings and goings. Do you think he thought? I mean, the fact that he took the stand, I thought maybe he thinks he's going to get past this. Do you think he thought he would?
Even though Mike Madigan frequently came across as kind of meek and mild-mannered, quiet speaking in public, the no cell phone, no computer thing kind of played into that image that he didn't need all of the modern, goodies of life and of politics. I think behind the scenes it was a different game, and I think Madigan taking the stand was proof of that he thought he could talk his way out of it, schmooze his way out of it. That's the game in Springfield where people aren't necessarily paying as much attention. Those 12 jurors and the alternates were paying very close attention to what Madigan had to say and how he said it. It's not an episode of The Sopranos. You can't talk your way out of these things once you get to federal court.
Mm-hmm. The Velvet Hammer.
You might be able to. You might be. Yeah. You might.
That's his nickname.
Right. Yeah. The Velvet Hammer. Well, today they nailed him.
Yeah.
They nailed him. All right. All right. So, what do you see happening as it relates to? I don't even know what the maximum sentences are. The guidelines are.
He's going to be 83 in April.
Right. Yeah. He's getting. What do you? How do you see that playing out? I mean, does the government just go for bore like they have in the past?
Well, they certainly will go for whatever the appropriate highest sentence is. Madigan's likely to come back and claim age.
No priors.
We'll see a list of all of his illnesses. They will try to say, he's an elderly man. Let him live out his years under probation, home confinement, whatever. The government is unlikely to go for that. No proof that that's been the approach they've taken recently.
Not so far. That is true.
You remember former Speaker of the House Dennis Hastert said, "I'm sick. This is a death sentence for me." Well, he got out of prison after a year, and it wasn't a death sentence. Mike Madigan is likely to argue the same thing.
We shall see.
Chuck, thank you.
Chuck Gowdy, stay with us. We'll be right back. Stay with us.